They thought no help was coming. Then a human warship answered the silence. The air in the maintenance conduit was thin and sharp, tasting of ozone and the metallic tang of fear. It scraped Rylas's breathing vents with every ragged gasp. Red emergency lights, strobing in a frantic, irregular rhythm, painted the narrow space in washes of blood and shadow. They reflected off the crystalline walls, which seemed to weep a slick, cool condensation, making her grip treacherous. Each movement was a monumental effort, a battle against the creeping weakness in her limbs and the gray fog clouding her vision. Hypoxia was a gentle killer, lulling its victims with a growing sense of detachment, but Rylas fought it with every fiber of her being. She crawled, her engineer's claws scrabbling for purchase on the slick conduit below. Just a little farther. The central power junction was just ahead, a knot of interwoven energy lines that represented the colony's dying heart. Faintly, through the layers of crystal and rock, she could hear the deep, rhythmic tremors from the surface. The Scorn were methodically shattering their beautiful city, their beautiful world. Warning, atmospheric purity at critical. Life support at 9%, a soft, automated voice chimed in her mind link, a message she had been ignoring for the better part of an hour. The voice was designed to be calming, but now it sounded like a funeral dirge. 9%. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough time for the 20,000 Kalon huddled in the great cavern below. Not enough time for the children whose laughter had once filled the crystal plazas of Alicia. Override Safety Protocol 7 Gamma, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Her clawed fingers fumbled with the access panel of the junction. It was sealed, locked down by the same automated systems trying to preserve the last dregs of life. Negative. Override requires administrator-level clearance. Catastrophic system failure imminent. Rylas ignored it. She wedged the tip of her multi-tool into the seam of the panel and pried, her muscles screaming in protest. Metal groaned, then snapped. The panel flew open, revealing the pulsating core of the power grid. It hummed with a low, mournful energy, a fading light against an infinite darkness. This was the point of no return. Diverting this power meant taking the last breathable air from the lungs of her friends, her family, from Elder Solara, whose songs had been the cradle of her childhood. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her even more than the failing atmosphere. But what was the alternative? To die in silence? To let their entire civilization vanish without a single soul in the galaxy knowing they had even existed? No. It has to be enough, she breathed, her movements becoming more frantic. She pulled a bypass cable from her utility belt, its raw terminals sparking as she brought them close to the conduit. Let someone see our light. Her mind swam with images. Lyrinos, their brave administrator, his scales dull with weariness as he tried to project calm. The small, frightened faces of the younglings clinging to their mothers in the great cavern. The shimmering spires of Alicia under the twin suns, a sight she would never see again. The memories gave her a final surge of strength. She jammed the terminals into the core receptacle. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Energy, raw and untamed, surged through the cable. The hum of the conduit rose to a deafening shriek. The emergency lights flickered wildly, then died, plunging her into absolute blackness. Her mind link screamed with a dozen final warnings. Power cascade failure. Life support offline. Communications. Array overload. She felt the surge, not as an engineer, but as a Kalon. The entire colony was a living crystal, and she could feel the energy being drawn from every corner of the shelters, a great, collective exhalation, and focused into a single point. The long-range distress beacon. It was no longer a plea. For one glorious second, it was a roar, a defiant scream of existence hurled into the uncaring void. Then, silence. The shriek died. The power was gone. Her body, already pushed far beyond its limits, finally gave out. As she collapsed onto the cold floor of the conduit, the darkness behind her eyes complete, her last conscious thought was not of fear or pain, but of a children's song. A song about the smallest star in the sky, the one that burned brightest just before it faded away, hoping that, somewhere, a lost traveler might see its final, brilliant spark. Please, she whispered to the crushing silence. Hear us. With a final, desperate pulse, The beacon fell silent, its cry swallowed by the immense emptiness of space. On the command deck of the Scorn flagship, Gorgon's Maw, no one noticed. The bridge was a testament to the Scorn philosophy, a chaotic fusion of brutally efficient technology and barbaric ostentation. Jagged, dark metal consoles were interspersed, with the skulls of conquered species, their empty eye sockets serving as a constant reminder of the price of defiance. Chained to the bulkheads were a few emaciated captives from a previous conquest, their spirits long broken, their presence meant to inspire fear in Gorgon's own crew as much as any visitor. The air was thick and heavy, a cloying mix of ozone. From the overworked weapon systems and the musky, reptilian scent of the Scorn themselves, underscored by the faint, greasy aroma of their last meal. Warchief Gorgon lounged on his command throne, a grotesque masterpiece crafted from the spine and ribs of some great, Leviathan-like creature he had personally slain. He watched the main view screen with a predator's lazy satisfaction as another crystal spire on the planet below silently blossomed into a cloud of incandescent dust. "They die so beautifully," he rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. "Such fragile things. All glitter and light. Then nothing." His subcommander, Track, approached the throne, his own smaller frame hunched in deference. "The last orbital defense platform is dust, Warchief. They have no weapons left. Their pathetic military has been silenced." Pathetic is the word, Gorgon snorted, running a clawed hand over the arm of his throne. Did they truly think their little mining lasers could scratch the hull of a Scorn warship? It was almost insulting. Are there any amusing pops left to watch? Track consulted his console. The surface bombardment has ceased. They are conserving their remaining energy, likely for life support in their underground burrows. He paused, tapping a control. "We did detect a final energy cascade from their primary grid a few moments ago. A massive surge, then total failure. It appears their entire power network has collapsed." Gorgon's lipless mouth split into what passed for a Scorn grin. The last gasp of a dying rat. It means nothing. He had seen this a dozen times before. A brief, pointless flare of defiance before the inevitable end. It was part of the game he so enjoyed. The initial shock, the futile resistance, the dawning horror, and then, the final, delicious despair. But his patience was wearing thin. The beauty of their destruction was beginning to bore him. "Enough waiting," Gorgon declared, heaving his massive frame from the throne. "The hunt is over. It is time for the harvest." He stalked towards the view screen, his heavy footfalls echoing on the metal deck. His gaze was fixed on the burning world below. "Begin the landing. I want to hear them scream." Track's head bowed. "Your orders, Warchief? The usual division?" "Yes," Gorgon said, his eyes glittering with avarice. "I want half for the slave pits of Scar. The Kalon's delicate features will fetch a high price. The rest, leave their husks in the main plaza. We will build a monument from their crystal homes and their bones. A warning to any other soft-shelled fools in this sector who might dream of defying the Scorn." The subcommander hurried to relay the orders. Alarms blared, signaling the transition from orbital bombardment to ground assault. On the view screen, the ugly, block-like shapes of troop carriers began to detach from the bellies of the destroyers, their engines burning bright as they began their descent. Gorgon watched, his thoughts turning from the simple pleasure of destruction to the more complex satisfaction of commerce. He calculated the profits, the boost to his reputation, the envy of the other war chiefs. This conquest had been easy, almost too easy. These Kalon were artists and singers, not warriors. They had folded with the first application of real pressure. Still, their world was rich in rare crystals, and their population would make excellent, if short-lived, luxury slaves. It was a profitable venture. The brief energy spike his analyst had mentioned was already forgotten, a meaningless flicker in the grand, brutal calculus of imperial expansion. It was inconceivable to him that such a flicker could be a cry for help, and even more inconceivable that anyone in the cold, indifferent expanse of the outer rim would bother to answer. The air in the great cavern was a shared exhalation of 20,000 souls, growing staler and thinner with every passing moment. The shelter's primary life support had failed when Rylus made her sacrifice, and now only the low-level emergency systems circulated the dwindling supply of oxygen. The only light came from the Kaelon themselves, their innate bioluminescence creating a soft, ethereal glow that painted the vast chamber in hues of gentle blue and pale lavender. It was a beautiful, tragic light, the last light of a dying people. With every tremor from the surface, dust and crystal fragments drifted down from the vaulted ceiling, sparkling like bitter tears in the dimness. Administrator Lyrinos moved through the silent, huddled masses. He touched a shoulder here, offered a quiet word there. His own scales, once a vibrant cobalt, now faded to a dull, weary gray. He projected an aura of calm, a mask of leadership. He had worn for 7 straight days, but beneath it, his spirit was fracturing. He had led his people to this world with promises of peace and prosperity, a haven far from the galactic core's endless politics. He had promised them safety. The rhythmic, bone-jarring thuds from above were the sound of that promise being ground into dust. In the center of the vast cavern, Elder Solara had gathered the youngest of the colony, the pneumolts who were too small to comprehend the finality of their situation. Her voice, though frail with age, was clear and steady as she wove the ancient songs of passing. She did not sing of endings, but of transformations. "And fear not the shadow, little sparks," she sang, her voice a fragile anchor in the sea, of quiet desperation. "For the light within you finds its own way home. It joins the great crystal, the heart of all things, and there it sings forever, a note in the eternal song." The children watched her, their large, dark eyes mesmerized by her calm. Their parents, however, understood the true meaning of the song. They held each other, their own light dimming with grief, finding a final, heartbreaking solace in the dignity their elder provided. Not all shared that quiet resignation. At the cavern's edge, beside a jury-rigged communications console, Trade, Captain Luxori was consumed by a bitter fire. For 40 years he had navigated the outer rim, building a web of contacts, favors, and friendships. He knew smugglers who could bypass any blockade and corporate security chiefs who owed him their careers. Now, that web was proving to be as insubstantial as a spider's thread in a hurricane. He sent out one last, desperate call, targeting a ship whose signature he recognized, a formal Hegemony patrol cruiser. Hegemony Cruiser Steadfast. "This is Trade Captain Luxori of the Alicia Colony on Kaelon. We have a humanitarian crisis. The Galactic Charter, Article 7, Section 4, compels you to intervene in acts of piracy against civilian populations." His plea was sharp, legalistic, a drowning man grasping at the letter of the law. For a long moment, there was only static. Then, a voice answered, as cold and empty as the space between stars. "Trade Captain Luxori, this is Commander Valerius of the Hegemony vessel Steadfast. Your colony is located in an unpatrolled sector. The Scorn are a known hazard of the Rim. Your settlement was established against Hegemony advisement. Advisement? We are being slaughtered. There are 20,000 souls here." Luxori screamed into the calm, "We will not risk a capital-class ship and its crew to protect a non-strategic asset." The voice replied, devoid of any emotion. "The loss of your colony, while regrettable, is an acceptable cost to maintain the security of core ward territories. Our sincerest condolences." Steadfast out. The channel went dead. Luxori stared at the console, his forehands clenched into tight fists. Acceptable cost. Their lives, the lives of 20,000 innocent people, were an acceptable cost. His rage was so profound it left no room for tears. He had thought the pirates were the monsters, but the cold, bureaucratic indifference of the so-called civilized powers was a different kind of evil, one that was perhaps even more terrifying at that moment. The ground heaved violently. The rhythmic thudding from above was replaced by a high-pitched, grinding shriek. The Scorn had brought their sonic drills to bear. Cracks, like black lightning, shot across the cavern's crystalline ceiling. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Panic, held at bay for so long by dignity and song, began to ripple through the huddled masses. Lyrinos rushed to calm them, his voice cracking. "Hold fast. Remember who you are? We are Kaelon." But Elder Solara did not waver. She simply pulled the children closer, her own light glowing a little brighter, a final act of defiance against the encroaching darkness. She looked at Lyrinos, her ancient eyes filled not with fear, but with a deep, profound sorrow. The last flicker of hope, which had lived in the unanswered silence of the void, was now truly extinguished by the sound of their tomb being cracked open. The Combat Information Center of the United Nations Ship Vigilance was a place of deep shadow and quiet purpose. It was not designed for comfort, but for ruthless efficiency. The air was cool and recycled, smelling faintly of clean ozone and hot metal. There were no decorations, save for a single, burnished metal plaque bolted to the central bulkhead. Its Latin inscription a stark summary of the ship's true mission, Inter Oves et Lupos Stamus. We stand between the sheep and the wolves. The only light came from the cool blue and white glow of holographic tactical displays, which floated like silent ghosts in the darkness, projecting streams of data that painted a picture of the silent, lonely void outside. Commander Ben Carter, his face illuminated by the soft light of his console, saw the anomaly first. It wasn't a signal, not in the traditional sense. It was the echo of a signal, a massive, desperate pulse of energy that had screamed itself hoarse and then died, leaving behind a faint, rapidly decaying energy signature. It was the ghost of a cry for help. "Captain, on your display," he said, his voice calm and even. "Long-range ensemble catch. It's a ghost, a dying beacon that just blew out its own power grid. Looks like it fired off one last, supercharged burst." Captain Eva Rostova, standing in the center of the CIC, didn't move, but her gaze sharpened on the main tactical display where Ben had highlighted the signature. Source? Traced it to the Kepler system. Outer rim, uncharted by official consensus. Flagged as a high-risk sector. Ben's fingers flew across his console. The energy signature profile is Kalon. Peaceful, non-expansionist species. Small colony listed in the independent registry, Alicia. He paused, his expression hardening. Cross-referencing local ship movements. Hostile signatures flagged in orbit of the source planet. Profile match. Scorn Raiders. One capital-class vessel, multiple destroyers. A full Marauder fleet. A heavy silence settled over the CIC. Everyone on that bridge knew the name Scorn. They were not pirates. They were butchers. Slavers who took what they wanted and burned the rest for sport. "The Scorn," Rostova said, her voice low and tight. "They don't leave survivors." She turned away from the main display, her eyes sweeping over her senior staff. Status report. Now, Commander Anya Sharma, the ship's chief engineer, looked up from her console, her dark eyes serious. "Captain, Kepler is over 4 light years from our current position. Standard FTL would take a week. By then, there will be nothing left but bones and orbiting debris." "I am aware, Commander," Rostova said, "which is why we won't be using standard FTL. What's the status of the Cascade Drive?" Sharma chewed her lip. The Cascade Drive was humanity's greatest secret, a drive that didn't travel through space, but folded it, allowing for near-instantaneous jumps across impossible distances. It was also dangerously unstable. "The drive is primed, Captain." The last diagnostic was green across the board. "But a jump this far, this fast, we'd be pushing it past every safety margin we have. The math is ugly, Eva. There's a 30, maybe 35% chance we misfold and end up as abstract art spread across a few light seconds of space-time. And what's the chance those colonists survive if we do nothing?" Rostova countered, her voice cutting through the quiet tension. Sharma met her captain's gaze and gave a single, grim nod. 0%. Rostova then looked to a man who stood silently in the shadows near the tactical table, his armor making him seem like a part of the ship's bulkhead. "Major Tanaka?" Marine Major Kenji Tanaka stepped into the light. His face was a mask of placid calm. "My teams are on standby, Captain. Non-lethal loadouts are prepped. We can be on the ground and neutralizing hostiles within 3 minutes of you giving the green light." Rostova took a deep breath, the cold, recycled air feeling heavy in her lungs. This was the moment of decision, the fulcrum upon which 20,000 lives rested. Their orders were clear: observe, report, and above all, remain undetected. The Shepherd Protocol was humanity's unilateral, secret promise to the galaxy. A promise to protect the innocent from the predators who thrived in the lawless spaces. But intervention was a last resort, an act that risked exposing humanity's true technological level, a secret they had guarded for over a century. Revealing themselves could destabilize galactic politics, invite suspicion, and perhaps even war. The faces of her crew were turned towards her, waiting. They knew the risks. They understood the stakes. They had all sworn the same oath. 35% risk, Rostova said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. 100% certainty. She looked at the fading signature on the screen, the ghost of a scream from a dying world. The moral calculus was brutally simple. You do not let the wolves have the flock. Commander Sharma, she said, her voice ringing with the clear, hard authority of command. Prepare the cascade drive. Spool it to 110%. I want to be out of the fold and on top of them before they even know we're coming. Captain, Sharma replied, a flicker of fierce pride in her eyes as she turned back to her console. Major Tanaka, brief your teams. I want the Scorn ground forces neutralized with 0 civilian casualties. We're saving a world today, not conquering one. Understood, Captain, Tanaka said with a slight bow. Commander Carter, Rostova concluded, her gaze finally returning to the tactical plot. Plot the jump. Take us straight into the heart of their fleet. Let's remind these butchers what happens when a wolf finds a shepherd waiting for it. Her crew moved with silent, practiced speed, their actions a symphony of lethal purpose. They were the UNS Vigilance. They were humanity's secret guardians, their unthanked protectors. As the ship around them began to thrum with the impossible energies of the Cascade Drive, Captain Rostova stood alone in the center of the CIC, a solitary figure bearing the weight of a promise made in secret, a promise to a galaxy that did not even know it needed protecting. The plaque on the wall seemed to glow in the dim light. We stand between the sheep and the wolves. And the wolves are about to be put down, she whispered. Space tore itself open. For a fraction of a second, a non-place existed at the edge of the Kepler system, a shimmering wound in reality. From that wound, the UNS Vigilance emerged, not with a roar of engines, but with the chilling silence of a blade sliding from its sheath. It was a phantom, a sliver of absolute blackness against the star-dusted velvet of space, its composite hull drinking in light and radiation, leaving nothing for enemy sensors to find. The Cascade Drive had worked. They had crossed 4 light years. In under an hour, for 3 minutes that stretched into an eternity, the human ship simply hung there, a ghost at the feast, utterly invisible. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the crew absorbed a torrent of data. They mapped every Scorn vessel, cataloged every weapon signature, analyzed every energy reading, and plotted every trajectory. They were not just preparing for a battle. They were writing its obituary before it had even begun. They have 12 troop transports on the surface and 3 more on approach, Major Tanaka reported, his voice a low murmur. Ground forces are using sonic drills to breach the main shelter. The colonists have minutes, not hours. The fleet is sloppy, Commander Carter added, his eyes scanning the tactical hologram. Arrogant. Their energy shields are cycling on low power to conserve energy for their own planetary bombardment. They're not expecting a fight. Then let's give them one they'll never forget, Captain Rostova said. She leaned forward, her expression set like granite. Open a channel. All frequencies, unencrypted. On the bridge of the Gorgon's Maw, the sudden, clear voice that boomed from the speakers was so unexpected that several Scorn officers physically flinched. Scorn vessels, this is Captain Eva Rostova of the United Nations Ship Vigilance. You are committing crimes against a peaceful, sentient species. You have exactly 60 standard seconds to power down your weapons, cease all ground operations, and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning. War Chief Gorgon, who had been observing his ground troops' progress, stared at the speaker as if it had personally insulted him. He threw his head back and laughed, a dry, rasping sound that echoed across his bridge. A human? A single human ship? Out here. He strode to the comms panel. Human, he snarled. Do you primitives even know who we are? You have blundered into the jaws of a god. Withdraw now, and I might let you live long enough to become my personal slave. Rostova's voice returned, as calm and cold as a dying star. 50 seconds, War Chief. Find them. Gorgon roared, his rage boiling over. Scan every rock and every shadow. I want their ship turned to slag, and their head brought to me on a spike." The Scorn fleet scrambled. Their sensor arrays swept across the void, desperately searching for the source of the transmission. But they found nothing. The Vigilance was a hole in the universe. 30 seconds. The voice counted down. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Rostova watched the chronometer. The crew was a study in controlled tension. No fear, only focus. They were a single, unified weapon, poised to strike. 10 seconds. Carter announced that Rostova's gaze was fixed on the tactical display, on the image of the Gorgon's maw. "Time's up," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Commander Carter, execute protocol hammerfall. Major Tanaka, you are green to go. Light them up." The universe held its breath. Then, the Vigilance fired. Its spinal-mounted magnetic accelerator cannon, a weapon the Scorn couldn't even conceive of, unleashed a single, 800-kilogram tungsten rod at a measurable fraction of the speed of light. There was no bright energy beam, no dramatic sound, just a silent, kinetic truth hurtling across space. The rod crossed the distance to the Gorgon's maw in less than a second. It didn't explode on the hull, it simply passed through it. It punched through the forward armor, obliterated the command bridge in a cloud of vaporized metal and flesh, tore through the length of the ship, and exited through the main reactor core. For a moment, Gorgon's flagship just hung there. Then, it erupted. A silent, obscene flower of white-hot plasma bloomed from its center, engulfing the vessel in its own death. War Chief Gorgon and his entire command crew ceased to exist before their nervous systems could even register the impact. Simultaneously, the belly of the Vigilance opened, and a swarm of sleek, dark objects detached, streaking towards the planet's atmosphere. Major Tanaka's marine assault pods, bypassing the space battle entirely. The Scorn fleet, its command structure instantly decapitated, was thrown into chaos. Before they could even process the loss of their flagship, the Vigilance turned its attention to the rest of them. Plasma cannons, firing lances of contained stellar fire, superheated the armor on the nearest destroyer, slicing through its spine. A cloud of swarm missiles, each with its own rudimentary AI, descended upon the smaller frigates, intelligently targeting shield emitters and weapon emplacements. Point defense lasers, tracking with impossible speed, swatted incoming Scorn projectiles from the sky, as if they were bothersome insects on the ground. Tanaka's pods slammed into the earth around the Scorn landing zones like righteous meteors. The armored hatches blew open, and his marines moved out, not with the chaotic rage of conquerors, but with the surgical precision of surgeons. Their weapons didn't fire lethal rounds. Instead, sonic pulses washed over the Scorn positions, overloading their reptilian nervous systems and dropping them where they stood. Concussion grenades and sleep gas canisters arced through the air, neutralizing entire squads without spilling a drop of blood. The Scorn, who had been laughing as they prepared to slaughter helpless civilians, found themselves disabled, disoriented, and defeated before they could even understand what was happening. In space, the battle was a massacre. The technological disparity was not a gap, it was a chasm. The Scorn had brought knives to a fusion cannon fight. Their ships were designed for terrorizing poorly defended colonies, not for engaging a dedicated warship built by a species that had perfected the art of killing. Enemy destroyer disabled, Carter reported, his voice level. Heavy cruiser losing atmosphere on decks 4 through 7. 2 frigates are attempting to break orbit. Scan them, Rostova ordered without hesitation. Any ship carrying Kalon, life signs, or plundered resources get stopped permanently. The scans came back a moment later. One of the fleeing ships was clean. The other was packed with stolen artifacts from the city's archives. A single plasma beam lanced out from the Vigilance and carved the fleeing thief in half. The message was unmistakable. You can run, but you cannot profit from this. The Battle of Kalon lasted exactly 17 minutes, from the first MAC round to the final, pathetic surrender broadcast from the last remaining Scorn destroyer. The humans fought with a fury that was as terrifying as it was efficient. When the smoke cleared, half the Scorn fleet was drifting, disabled and dark. The other half had fled into the void. On the planet's surface, every single Scorn soldier was unconscious, neatly piled, and awaiting pickup. In the Great Cavern, the sonic drilling had stopped. The tremors had ceased. The huddled Kalon looked at each other, their dim light reflecting a terrifying, hopeful question in their eyes. The silence that followed was more profound than any sound. It was the silence of survival, a silence bought for them by strangers who had come roaring out of the void, answering a prayer they thought no one would ever hear. When the deep, bone-jarring tremors finally ceased, the silence that followed was, for a time, more terrifying than the noise had been. In the breathless dark of the great cavern, 20,000 Kalon waited for the final breach, for the hiss of an airlock, for the guttural shouts of their executioners. Administrator Lyrinos gathered the last of his strength, preparing to stand. Between the monsters and his people, a final, futile gesture of defiance. Elder Solara finished her song, her last note hanging in the stale air like a single, perfect crystal, but the final breach never came. Instead, after long minutes of terrifying quiet, a new sound reached them. A low, powerful hum. The cavern's emergency lights, which had been flickering weakly, suddenly brightened, bathing the chamber in a steady, clean light. The air scrubbers kicked in with a powerful whoosh, and for the first time in a week, the Kalon drew breath that wasn't tinged with the taste of their own slow suffocation. Hesitantly, Lyrinos led a small party towards the main entrance, which had been sealed by a rockfall from the sonic drilling. As they approached, a section of the rock wall glowed cherry red, then dissolved into a perfectly circular opening, melting away with a technology they had never seen. Through the opening stood a figure unlike any Scorn. It was tall and slender, encased in sleek, dark armor that seemed to absorb the light. It raised a single, open hand, a universal gesture of peace. Lyrinos and Solara stepped through the opening into the ruins of their city. The scene that met them was one of profound cognitive dissonance. Their beautiful Alicia was a wasteland of shattered crystal and blackened craters. But moving through the ruins were not the hulking, reptilian forms of the Scorn. Instead, these bipedal beings in their dark blue environmental suits moved with a quiet, focused purpose. One group was directing powerful beams of light at a downed spire, its 1,000 broken shards lifting into the air and reassembling as if time were flowing in reverse. Another team was already working on the main power grid, their portable fusion generator, a device no bigger than a shuttlecraft engine, humming with incredible power. Everywhere, there were scenes of incomprehensible mercy. They saw a human medic, her face visible through a clear helmet, kneeling beside a collapsed Kalon. She wasn't brandishing a weapon, but a small, silver device that bathed the colonist in a soft green light, his ragged breathing instantly easing. They saw the Scorn ground troops, not butchered as they would have been, but lying unconscious in neat rows, their weapons piled beside them, guarded by two of the silent, armored humans. Dr. Kate Morgan, the ship's chief medical officer, saw the delegation emerge and approach them, her own movements slow and non-threatening. She gestured to a small, floating drone that projected a holographic interface. A moment later, a synthesized voice spoke, translating her words. "You are safe now. We are from the United Nations ship, Vigilance. The hostiles have been neutralized. My teams are providing medical assistance." Elder Solara, leaning heavily on Lyrinos' arm, stared at the human. "Neutralized?" she managed, her own voice coming through the translator. "Yes," Dr. Morgan confirmed. "The enemy fleet has been disabled or has fled. Their ground forces are in custody. There is no longer any threat to your people." It was too much to process. The complete and utter despair of moments ago was being washed away by a reality so far outside their experience that it felt like a dream. As more Kalon emerged from the shelters, the human response was immediate and overwhelming in its kindness. Medics moved through the crowd, scanning for injuries, distributing nutrient packs and hydration units. Engineers, led by Commander Sharma, began a systematic assessment of the damage, their efficiency a thing of wonder. Major Tanaka's Marines, their combat armor now powered down to a less intimidating state, established a perimeter, not to contain the Kalon, but to protect them, their posture one of watchful guardianship. They handed out thermal blankets to the shivering and gently guided the days towards the makeshift triage centers. Finally, another human approached, her bearing marking her as the leader. She wore no helmet, and her face was etched with a deep weariness, but her eyes were clear and direct. This was Captain Eva Rostova. She waited until a proper two-way translation could be established, then addressed Solara directly. Elder Rostova's translated voice was respectful. I am Captain Rostova. I am deeply sorry for the loss of your city. We arrived as fast as we could. Solara, the keeper of her people's history and wisdom, who had prepared to lead them in a song of death, found herself speechless. She looked at the human captain, at the impossible scene of rescue and repair around her, and finally found the only question that mattered. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. We are strangers. Our world is nothing to you. We have no wealth, no power. We could offer you nothing in return. Why would you risk so much for us? Rostova looked from the ancient Kalon elder to the faces of the survivors, her gaze lingering on the small children who were now curiously approaching her marines, drawn by the novelty rather than fear. Elder, Rostova began, her voice soft but firm, carrying a weight that seemed to echo across millennia of human history. My people have a past filled with monsters, many of whom were of our own making. We learned a long time ago, through great pain and loss, that the only way to keep them at bay is to stand up to them, wherever they are found, and whomever they are preying upon. She took a step closer, her eyes locking with Solara's. We heard your call for help, a call the rest of the galaxy chose to ignore. In our philosophy, hearing that call and having the power to answer it creates a responsibility. It was our duty to act. A duty, not a calculation of profit, not a strategic gambit, not an act of conquest. A duty. The concept was so alien, so profoundly at odds with the brutal calculus of the Outer Rim, that Lyrinos and Solara could only stare in stunned silence. The humans had not come as conquerors or traitors. They had come as guardians, answering a call out of moral obligation. In the ruins of their world, under the light of a portable human sun, the Kalon were witnessing the birth of a new and terrifyingly powerful idea. The concept of grace in a galaxy that had taught them there was none. A week later, the UNS Vigilance maintained its silent watch in high orbit. Below, the planet Kalon was already beginning to heal. The portable fusion generators hummed in the heart of Alicia, powering the reconstruction efforts. The scars on the landscape remained, but they were now marks of survival, not defeat. Alongside the human vessel hung the captured Scorn ships, their engines dead, their weapons silenced, silent monuments to a failed atrocity. They were being prepped for a long, slow journey to a classified human black site. Their crews held in the Vigilance's brig on the main view screen in the captain's ready room. The faces of Administrator Lyrinos and Elder Solara looked out, their bioluminescent scales restored to a healthy, vibrant luster. The last of your engineering teams are returning now, Captain, Lyrinos reported, his voice filled with a reverence that still felt new. They have stabilized our primary crystal conduits. They say we will have 70% power capacity by the end of the month. Commander Sharma and her people are the best there is, Rostova replied from her chair. They leave things better than they found them. You have all given us more than we could have ever imagined, Elder Solara said, her ancient eyes soft with emotion. The Kalon High Council has been convened. We wish to offer you anything. Mining rights to the deep crystals, a share of our world, a place in our histories as gods. Rostova managed a small, weary smile. The offer was a familiar one. Desperate people often mistook overwhelming power for divinity. Elder, we are not gods. We are just people who chose to act. We ask for no tribute, no payment. But we must give you something. Lyrinos insisted. Our honor demands it. Very well, Rostova said, leaning forward. There is one thing we will ask of you. A promise. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The galaxy can be a dark and predatory place. We cannot be everywhere at once. The day will come when you see another people, another flock, facing the wolves. You may have the power to help them, to offer shelter, to speak up for them when others are silent. When that day comes, we ask that you remember this one. Remember what it felt like to be the sheep, praying for a shepherd. That is the only payment. We will accept. Pay the debt forward. Lyrinos and Solara stared, humbled into silence. The humans were not just giving them their lives. They were giving them a new philosophy, a new purpose. Captain, Commander Carter's voice interrupted from The bridge. We have a vessel approaching. Hegemony cruiser, it's the Steadfast. They're hailing us. On screen, Rostova ordered. The image of Commander Valerius appeared. The Hegemony officer looked profoundly uncomfortable. Captain Rostova, he began, foregoing formal greetings. My government has reviewed the data from your ship's logs, which you so helpfully forwarded. We were unaware of the full scope of the Scorn threat. I wish to offer a formal apology for my failure to intervene. An apology is not necessary. Commander, Rostova said, her voice neutral. But a promise is. This system requires protection. The Hegemony agrees, Valerius said quickly. The Steadfast is under new orders to establish a permanent protective patrol of the Kepler sector. This colony will not be left vulnerable again. You have my word. On behalf of the people of Kalin, we thank you, Commander, Rostova said, letting the Hegemony save face. See that you keep it. The channel closed. Meanwhile, deep within the Vigilance, in a sterile, white interrogation cell, the defeated War Chief Gorgon sat before a human intelligence officer. He had been treated with a clinical mercy that was more maddening than any torture. His wounds were healed, he was fed, he was clean. It was a courtesy he had never extended to any of his own captives, and he could not comprehend it. You fight like demons, the Scorn rasped, his voice a broken shell of its former arrogance. You shattered my fleet. You took my ship, my honor. You could have killed us all, atomized our ships. Why didn't you? The human interrogator, a quiet man whose name Gorgon didn't know, simply took a sip of his coffee. Because that's what you would have done, he said. And we are not you. He slid a data pad across the table. Now, let's talk about the slave markets on Skar. We're going to be paying them a visit next. Gorgon stared at the human, at the calm, implacable resolve in his eyes, and for the first time, he understood. These humans weren't just warriors. They were an immune system, a cure for the galaxy's sicknesses, and his own brutal species was just one of the diseases they intended to eradicate. Back on the bridge, the order was given. The captured Scorn ships, now under remote human control, began their slow journey. The Vigilance turned its bow towards the endless dark. Cascade drive spooled and ready, Captain, Anya Sharma reported. Rostova took one last look at the blue-green jewel of Kalin on the view screen. One flock was safe, but the wolves were always out there, hunting. Their lonely vigil was far from over. Take us out, she commanded. The ship once again tore a hole in the fabric of space and vanished. It left behind a saved world, a humbled hegemony, and a story that would be whispered in the dark corners of the outer rim for generations to come. It was the story of silent guardians, of a species that fought with the fury of demons and the mercy of saints. It was the legend of the shepherds who had answered a desperate prayer, proving that even in the coldest, most indifferent void, you were never truly alone.